If one rejects laissez-faire on account of man's fallibility and moral weakness, one must for the same reason also reject every kind of government action. Welcome to Keith Knight. Don't tread on anyone today. I have Kyle Anzalone of the Libertarian Institute and Patrick McFarlane of the Libertarian Institute, as well as the Liberty Weekly podcast. Kyle, where is the best place to find your work?
Just go to libertarianinstitute.org. My name's up there on the masthead next to Scott Horton, Pete, and Sheldon Richmond.
Excellent. How about your alternative media accounts?
We're set up for conflicts of interest on Library and MeWe. So MeWe, just search my name. There's also a conflicts of interest group. Library, I'll send you the URL, but it's /COI.
Got it. Pat, remind me of your alt media accounts.
Yeah, brother. So, I mean, the one-stop shop is libertyweekly.net, but I'm on Float, I'm on MeWe, I'm on Minds, I'm on Library, Odyssey, BitChute. I mean, I could keep going, but there's a lot of places, so just search Liberty Weekly, and chances are that I am there.
Today, we are going to do 15 quotes. We're each going to give 5 that we thought were sort of just life-changing quotes that really changed the way we saw either the political landscape, history, or life in general. Kyle Anzalone, start us off with your first quote.
All right, so I feel like this first one's cheating just a little bit because Ron Paul is basically just describing what red pill is, which is truth is treason in an empire of lies. But it was one of those things that once Ron said it and I started looking at the news in that way, it really helped me go down to the path of liberty. This was probably like 2009 was introduced to Ron Paul. I would say by 2010 I was a libertarian, maybe 2011, I don't know, when you I actually changed what I would label myself, but this was one thing where when I started looking at things this way and realized that, the reason people are, getting in trouble and stuff like that is because they're speaking the truth. That's why people are getting censored. And of course, with the rest of the quotes I have here, they're all pretty much examples of, of things people spoke out against and got themselves in trouble for, even though it was the truth.
Pat, what is your quote for us here?
Okay, so for the first one, I'm going to start us off with, this is a goodie. I'm going to share my screen here so we can watch it. But one of the chemical weapons attacks that occurred in Syria, I was just kind of becoming aware of foreign policy. And I remember this happening where Thomas Massie went on to talk about why it doesn't really make sense that Assad would gas his own people. The reason why this is a red pill quote is because just the reaction of the CNN news correspondent. And it was red pilling for me because you can really, really see the establishment narrative pointing in one direction. So it's about 1:14 long. We'll just watch it. I'll speed it up just a tad here for us. Here we go.
Know exactly what's happening in Syria right now. I'd like to know specifically how that release of chemical gas, if it did occur, and it looks like it did, how that occurred. Because frankly, I don't think Assad would have done that. It does not serve his interests. It would tend to draw us into that civil war even further.
Who do you think is behind it? Who do you think is behind it?
You've got a war going on over there. Supposedly that airstrike was on an ammo dump, and so I don't know if it was released because there was gas stored in the ammo dump or not. That's plausible. I'm not saying that's what I think happened, but
You're more inclined to believe the position of what Bashar al-Assad is saying and what the Russians are saying right now than more inclined to believe what even your colleagues here in the United States believe is truth, that this is Assad, and what human rights observers over there say is Assad?
I don't think it would have served Assad's purposes to do a chemical attack on his people. So it's hard for me to understand why he would do that if he did.
Congressman Tom Massie, thanks for your time.
Yeah, so she doesn't even know what to say about that. I just love her reaction to that. So,
I wish he would have called her a conspiracy theorist for just making a claim and not having tons of evidence to back it up. But yeah, dude, her eyes, we forget that there really are people who believe all this nonsense that that they are constantly pushing on us. We are so often reminded of the people who just laugh it off and don't care at all. We forget that there's actual victims of this this cult of statism. Pat, any final thoughts on the corporate press and believing stories with no evidence while calling us conspiracy theorists, and Thomas Massie?
well, Thomas Massie is awesome, and I'll start by that. But on other hands, I mean, this happens all the time. I just did an episode with Kyle where we were talking about the China, the fear propaganda being pushed by independent media in China. We went through tons and tons of different ones. You had your interview with James Perloff, Keith, where you went through Century of War Lies even more times. So it's like this happens over and over again. The media is complicit in it. In fact, they pushed these lies. I went through in World War I how the British government went through and pushed all these lies, just inflaming the war and starting it. But Kyle, if I could tag you about that chemical weapons attack, what was the truth that eventually came out from that?
So I'm pretty sure that is the 2018 weapons attack in Conche Cooney's talking about, referring to the ammo dump. And I believe Tom Massie is right. It's hard to say what the actual conclusion is because there's a lot of flaws in the OPCW, that's the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons. In their report, like, people were apparently showing up to the hospital before the alleged attack even happened. But what we do know is that there was an ammo dump that the opposition leaders were meeting in. These are Al-Qaeda figures were meeting in. And when that meeting was happening, the Syrian government, in coordination with Russia and in full knowledge of the U.S., carried out that strike on that ammo dump. And not only was ammo stored there, but in situations in Syria, the opposition was taking things like fertilizer, cleaners, and stuff like that because it's a way to control the population. And so all that was probably stored together. And so there's a good article by Seymour Hersh, maybe in the London Review of Books, I could look up and send you the link, Keith, that goes into what the likely outcome of this was, but it definitely wasn't an Assad chemical weapons attack. It is tragic that people were poisoned somehow from this attack and ended up dying, but it's not the same thing as carrying out a chemical weapons attack. The U.S. never pretends that collateral damage is what it is.
Yeah, and the red pill moment from that is, look at how bloodthirsty and complicit the corporate media is. Look how they don't want to wait a single second to gather more intelligence before starting off a global conflict. Well, what could have escalated into a global conflict? Definitely a regional conflict. So, yeah, anyway, so that's my first one.
Mine is from Lysander Spooner. Government is in reality established by the few, and these few assume the consent of all the rest without any such consent being actually given. In other words, what he goes on to say in No Treason is, even if you got everyone's consent at the time, every single human being in America, the natives, the blacks, the women, the children, well, they are no longer alive, and you don't have the ability to transfer agreements to your kids. So this is a totally illegitimate form of contract transfer, or a transfer of obligations, rather, according to English common law. Reading this quote was so important because you sort of get this general idea that, well, that there is a large-scale consent. Well, if there is consent, you would first have to say who was in on it, and then say when it happened. You're saying something happened. These people, the citizens, gave consent to the government. What date did that occur on? Surely, if I have your car and you say, I never gave you my car, in order to say when you gave it to me, one of the first things is I'd say where we were and when this happened. Government cannot do that in the same way that we would ask any other organization to. So really, just getting... I guess it's Spooner's ability to say, no, really explain to me when this consensual agreement happen. Because monarchy, we see that's legitimate. That's just a guy claiming to rule. But what makes democracy legitimate is it's by the consent of the governed. And that's why but minarchist states all the way to big governments that are republics, democratic socialism is legitimate because it's based on consent. That's the difference. And reading Spooner and getting into the idea that it's literally a microscopic portion of people just claiming the right to rule everyone else was such a mind-blowing quote for me that I had to bring it up here. Kyle, next quote.
All right, the next one I have is from the great Scott Horton, his 2017 book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. He says about 9/11, the attack could not have been more misleading. The planes came out of the clear blue sky. And this is, what Scott's talking about here is that if you look at the video, it looks like the planes came out of the clear blue sky and hit the 9/11 towers. And as an American, certainly, for as young as I was that time, that's what it actually felt like. America was a country at peace. We've never, we haven't been fighting war since the fall of the Soviet Union. That was kind of my take on the world. And so this was an offensive strike against the U.S. But in reality, and what Scott explains through most of chapter 1 of Fool's Errand, is that absolutely wasn't the truth. The U.S. was at war with essentially Iraq, but a lot of the Muslim world from the fall of the Soviet Union on. We invaded Iraq, we stayed, and we've continued to intervene and bomb several countries. And it's not just Iraq under Clinton, it was also Sudan and others.
Exactly. And Ron Paul mentioned that when he voted to impeach Bill Clinton. They're like, so are you voting to impeach him for lying under oath during his deposition? And he said, I am voting to impeach the president bombed a pharmaceutical facility in Sudan. This is going to lead to blowback. This is, going to provoke incidents that Americans are going to have to pay the price for. Yes, I'm voting for impeachment. Unfortunately, I wish it were under different circumstances. It's incredible that we didn't get more of that under Trump, because it's like, yeah, I'm voting to impeach him, and then list all the other terrible things that Trump has done. It's always like, well, I really do think the phone call with the Ukrainian president it's so ridiculous that Ron Paul is such a breath of fresh air, along with, of course, Scott's heroic book, Fool's Errand. Pat, what is the next quote you have?
Yeah, so dovetailing off of that, leading up to the September 11th attacks, Kyle Anzalone, he mentioned that it's a lot of Americans lived in ignorance and they thought that we weren't at war and the U.S. was just minding its own business. Well, that leads to, in the 90s, there's this famous quote, which is my second one, by Madeline Albright. At that time, she was the U.S. ambassador to the UN, and she was interviewed by 60 Minutes correspondent Leslie Stahl in reference to the years of the U.S.-led economic sanctions against Iraq. I'll play the clip in a minute, but basically Madeline Albright takes for granted that 500,000 children died because of those sanctions and says that it was worth it, that the price was worth it. So furthermore, before we play that clip, basically because of that, she was promoted by Bill Clinton to become his Secretary of State. And she has attempted to explain it, and I'm showing an article by the great Sheldon Richman here. Let's see, her response made it even worse. She says, I must have been crazy. I should have answered the question by reframing it and pointing out the inherent flaws in the premise behind it. Saddam Hussein could have prevented any child from suffering simply by meeting his obligations. As soon as I had spoken, I wished for the power to freeze time and take back those words. My reply had been a terrible mistake, hasty, clumsy, and wrong. More of a mistake than actually killing the children in the first place. Nothing matters more than the lives of innocent people. I had fallen into the trap and said something I simply did not mean. That was no one's fault but my own. So, interestingly enough, the logic she uses here is to say, well, Saddam Hussein just should have gone along with our threats. He should have met his obligations. That's like saying, well, I'm a burglar. It's not my fault I murdered this person when I was mugging them. They should have just given me the purse, is basically the logic there. So I'll play the clip here. It's not too long. Here we go.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And, you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
All right, yeah, so that was the interview. Anything to add?
Yes, I'm just making my notes here. I need to make sure that to see how many New Yorkers it's okay for me to murder until Andrew Cuomo steps down, and then how many Californians I need to murder until Newsom steps down. I'm just doing the math. I'm taking Iraqi population minus the deaths and translating it to the California population. Kyle, while I do the math, any comments on Madeline Albright, our virtuous, humble servant?
I mean, it's just crazy that this is the foreign policy of humanitarian interventionism, responsibility to protect. And to be honest, I wouldn't at all be surprised if, let's say, Samantha Powers or somebody like that who was a like kind of a JV member of the Biden administration, who now or the Obama administration, who's now in the Trump administration, or Biden administration, who would, let's say, be confronted about like Yemen or Libya. I wonder if, they would say, well, the war in Yemen has been pretty brutal, but we think it was the right decision to support the Saudis. Like, I could really see them, because they're just that deep of believers that, if they didn't intervene, it would have been even worse. And so they had to do it. And it's just because that one person is really mean and is killing people. It's not us killing anyone.
Hey, Kyle, you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet, Kyle. I mean, you're just being naive here.
It's great that she's confronted with children too, because if it's men, then or people in general, then they're Iraqis, and so they're probably like influenced by Allah or Saddam to do crazy stuff. So it's a shame that they're starving to, but it's children, so you can't even like project that on them. And she's still like, yeah, it's worth it to kill them.
One of the amazing unappreciated things is that she's referring to Saddam, who is the head of the government, and she's part of the government in America. This totally throws a wrench in the belief that what happens is people are constantly warring with each other. Governments come in and they issue peace. They issue a sound currency. They allow for people to trade and respect property rights. It's the opposite. People generally are at peace. It's not that a ton of Americans hated a ton of Iraqis and a ton of Frenchmen hated a ton of German people. It's like a few people in governments, in the ruling classes of each country, who wage war against each other. That's the reality of war. So the idea that, well, if it weren't for government, we'd all be killing each other. Well, no, because of government. So often we're killing each other in a way that we otherwise wouldn't. So, the belief that government exists to keep people safe and stop us from going to war is not only not true, it is the antithesis of truth, because they're always trying to provoke us into wars. Just on the last two things that Pat has mentioned, whether it's a fake war in Syria or a fake war with Saddam.
Right. And how much more proof do you need? Then there's Americans who were so scared after 9/11 and stuff that they were willing to bomb places and go to war with countries that they couldn't find on a map.
It's terrible. Absolutely nonsense. Mine is from Larken Rose in a book titled The Most Dangerous Superstition. Larken Rose says, if human beings are so careless, stupid, and malicious that they cannot be trusted to do the right thing on their own, how would the situation be improved? By taking a subset of those very same careless, stupid, and malicious human beings and giving them societal permission to forcibly control all of the others. This is important because it gets to sort of everyone in the conflict of vision scale that Thomas Sowell puts forth. It's like, well, there are people that believe human beings are born good, and there's people who believe human beings are born terribly evil, and it's up to us to sort of lift them up. And there's other people who sort of find them on a scale between good and bad. No matter where your view of human nature is, whether you believe in total depravity as the Calvinists do, or you believe in human beings are born good, and then the Rousseauian belief that the culture makes them ill and evil and sort of gets them trying to compete with one another in vicious ways. No matter where you stand, there is no legitimate argument for the belief in government, the belief that some people have the right to rule over others. So any claim that, well, the ideas of voluntarism sound nice, but I just don't trust people. Well, as Larken Rose has also said, what species do you want running the government? If you don't trust people and you're afraid of, some people taking advantage over others, how does it then follow that you believe in the existence of a state, one group of people having the right to rule? I believe in his book he says, it's literally like saying, I don't trust you to be my neighbor, but I do trust you to be my master. So as bad as it is, and as genuinely dangerous as it can be to have someone engaging in activities that they are free to engage in, it's even worse to allow that person to either participate in the political system, one of the politicians themselves, not to mention who is attracted to political power, but the most evil people in the world. The Kissingers, the Maos, the Stalins, the Pol Pots, the Bin Ladens of the world, and David Rockefellers, and everything else. That is my third one. Kyle Anzalone, what's your next quote for us?
All right, so this one was very impactful for me at the time, and then once I learned a little bit about it and realized the truth, that was something else. And it's from George W. Bush, who said, "We cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun, that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud." And this, to me, when I was a kid when he said this, I was probably 11, 12 years old. I really believed that if we didn't go to war in Iraq, I was going to die, my family was going to die, my grandma was going to die, my dog was going to die. And when not only, all right, so, finding out eventually that the WMDs weren't there, that was kind of explained away. But once I really started to get into, the Scott Horton show and stuff, and learned that not only were the WMDs not there, that was a lie, I couldn't have been more mad that somebody made me so hateful that I just wanted, I didn't care about, Iraqi children, too bad that your government's trying to kill us all. You're going to give a WMD to Osama bin Laden, to nuke the Super Bowl. That was really things that that was warning. I remember after 9/11, I grew up in St. Louis. So I think that next Super Bowl was the Patriots versus the Rams. And in the lead up, on local news in the lead up to that Super Bowl, they were really talking about what if there's a terrorist attack, what's going to happen? What should people do? And it's absolutely terrifying, right? And they're ruining football for me. And so, yeah, bomb them, right? That's the mind of an 11-year-old. But and this is supposed to be the mature, responsible adult that, as Keith said, we gotta let the person to run the state and everything. Well, you end up with this person who's willing to terrify children, to try to get his war.
Exactly. Pat, next quote for us.
Okay, so this one goes to what the elites truly think about us. And it's pretty stark, man. So this is from James Corbett's documentary, How and Why Big Oil Conquered the World. I think there's three parts of it. And why, I think this is the why Big Oil conquered the world. So we'll put the transcript in the show notes page. But Corbett talks a lot about Maurice Strong in this documentary, and he is a insider kind of behind the environmental conservation, the global warming movement. And the true roots of the global warming movement is anti-human. And all we have to do is listen to what they say themselves. So in 1987, as a precursor to the Rio de Janeiro, one of the meetings that was incredibly important, but Maurice Strong organized an environmental conference in Denver, Colorado. It was called the Fourth World Wilderness Congress. The meeting took place in Denver, as I said. It brought together Maurice Strong, David Rockefeller, Edmund de Rothschild, then Treasury Secretary James Baker, and a whole bunch of other oligarchs, bankers, and Washington power elites. They were going to talk about the environment and conservation, right? Well, what they actually discussed was more incredible, as Corbett writes in his documentary. And I have the link right here. So it was revealed, before I play that, David Lang was an insider. He was a banker from Montreal who spoke during the conference. That is the one who said the quote that I'm about to play. But however, there was someone who helped George Hunt, a businessman in Boulder, Colorado, volunteered to help the conference as a concerned citizen, and he came away completely red-pilled and horrified by what he had witnessed at the conference. He released his own recordings of the proceedings in the early 90s to warn the public about this group that was meeting and its ultimate aims. And so this is something from his documentary that he released later on. So this is he talks about it in this documentary, but this is the actual words that were said.
I suggest, therefore, that this be solved not through a democratic process. That would take too long and devour far too much of the funds to educate the cannon fodder, unfortunately, which populates the earth. We have to take almost an elitist program that we can see beyond our swollen bellies and look to the future in time frames and in results which are not easily understood or which can be, with intellectual honesty, be reduced down to some kind of simplistic definition.
So in case you didn't catch that, I know the audio was a little garbled, but David Lang says he refers to selling their agenda from this conference, not to be put it up through a democratic process. That he says that would take too long. It would devour far too much of the funds to educate the cannon fodder, unfortunately, that populates the earth. So this is what we are to these people. We are just cannon fodder. We're insects that need to be crushed under a boot, essentially. And that's my red pill quote. I mean, just seeing past to what the elites really think about us cannon fodder.
Unbelievable. Absolutely. Excellent choice on that one. My next one is from Stephan Kinsella. The reason that this one is important is that it really gets to the syllogism of what it means to embrace an ideology. So while you can so often go back and forth between a Republican really means this. Oh no, that's a rhino. That's a Republican in name only. What it really means is, and then you can spend so much time and engage in so much efforts that ends up being futile. What he says for what it means to be an anarchist is, to be an anarchist only means that you believe that aggression is not justified, and that states necessarily employ aggression, and therefore that states and the aggression they necessarily employ are unjustified. It's quite simple, really. It's an ethical view, so no surprise it confuses utilitarians. Accordingly, anyone who is not an anarchist must maintain either A, aggression is justified, or B, states, in particular minimal states, do not necessarily employ aggression. The reason that was so big for me was it's just because, can we really get to the heart of what it means to believe in voluntarism or anarchism or libertarianism versus statism, monarchy, minarchy, and anything else? Just the fact that he was able to falsify the position and say, all right, but before we get into what you hypothetically think will happen because you pretend to be a psychic in the absence of a state, let's just say anyone who is not an anarchist must maintain either aggression is justified or states do not necessarily employ aggression. For me, that was that was just such a moment of clarity that it allowed me to see things in such a way I previously had not been able to appreciate. Kyle Anzalone, next quote.
All right, so my next quote is from Sean Henry, who is the CEO of CrowdStrike, and he said this in December of 2017. There is not evidence he's referring to the DNC emails, were actually exfiltrated. There is circumstantial evidence but no actual evidence. And this was not released until I believe May of 2020. And it was kept under wraps by Adam Schiff, who was in control of the House committee. And so the reason that this quote is so important is because from 2016 up until 2018, if you denied that Russia got the DNC emails and gave them to WikiLeaks, you were a useful idiot of the Russian regime, at best, if not a Russian bot and just paid off for the Kremlin. And they said that there was evidence that Russia stole those emails. This was said time and time again, that we know Russia took the emails, and they hid this evidence for years. That the CEO of CrowdStrike, the FBI didn't investigate the servers. The NSA didn't come to the conclusion that Russia stole the emails. They based it off of CrowdStrike, and CrowdStrike says they have no actual evidence. We have some evidence that we don't think, it would prove beyond a reasonable doubt, but no actual evidence. It's absolutely incredible. And for me, this was crazy because Russiagate was really one of the first things that I had a very loud opinion on, that was like a mainstream conversation. I cared a lot about Yemen or Palestine or Syria, but mainly those don't get talked about. And, I would post stuff on Twitter, and I would, normies would call me idiots and Trump supporters. And I was like, no, look, there's just no evidence. I'm not trying to pick a side here. And they insisted that they were right all along, and they still can't accept the truth now. It's crazy.
Oh, all right. So in other words, they're wrong about Russia. They're wrong about the minimum wage. They fabricate almost every racial incident hoax, but we got to trust them when it comes to the vaccine. Absolutely. Anything they tell us, definitely put it right inside your veins. Pat, next quote for us.
Okay, so this is the moment I truly became an anarchist. I remember it very clearly. I was in I think before my first year of law school. I read Anatomy of the State, and that was the moment I really became an anarchist. And it was maybe this exact paragraph. My quote after this one, my final quote, is what got me to read Anatomy of the State. But this is when it really, truly happened. So Rothbard writes, "If then the state is not us, if it is not the human family getting together to decide mutual problems, if it is not a lodge meeting or a country club, then what is it? Briefly, the state is that organization in society which attempts to maintain a monopoly on the use of force and violence in a given territorial area. In particular, it is the only organization in society that obtains its revenue not by voluntary contribution or payment for services rendered, but by coercion. While other individuals or institutions obtain their income by production of goods and services, and by the peaceful and voluntary sale of these goods and services to others, the state obtains its revenue by the use of compulsion, that is, by the use of the threat of the jailhouse and the bayonet. Having used force and violence to obtain its revenue, the state generally goes on to regulate and dictate the other actions of its individual subjects. One would think that simple observation of all states throughout history and over the globe would be proof enough of this assertion, but the miasma of myth has lain so long over the state activity that elaboration is necessary." So true is that last sentence from Murray Rothbard. I never viewed the state in this lens before, and it is horrifying because it is mainstream accepted as a foundation of modern political science that the state is a monopoly on the use of violence. This is not some harebrained theory. This is a very well solidified and accepted fact in political science. It is the cornerstone of modern political theory. Thomas Hobbes wrote about it. Barack Obama talks about it in an interview with Military Times, where he talks about the role that military contractors are playing in our foreign interventionism. So this is very widely accepted. It's not Murray Rothbard being some harebrained conspiracy crackpot theorist. So that was the moment when I finally realized this, not through public schooling, but reading on my own, that I became an anarchist.
Exactly, yeah. And it's so important to understand what you're arguing about before you start arguing. So when you're arguing with someone who says, you are a libertarian anarchist, so you don't like schools, It's not schools that makes a state unique. So you don't like roads. Well, it's not roads that make the state unique. You don't like people working together. You just get all of these different bullet points that you realize are completely irrelevant to the nature of the state and what we're actually arguing over. Shane Killian just had an excellent video of Nick Fuentes complaining about, how money gets involved in money and corruption and, people doing favors for each other and politicians and businessmen and, sort of exploiting the masses. All of those things have nothing to do with whether or not the state is legitimate, but what they do is they make all these criticisms and then attach them to the voluntary sector and then say, therefore, we're doing away with the voluntary sector. That's why Rothbard's work, especially in Anatomy of the State, is so important. Kyle, have you read that book, Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard?
I have not, actually.
That is probably the best introduction to Rothbard's work. If anyone hasn't read it, just because it's so short and so easy. My next one is by a historian, Burt Folsom, in his book "The Myth of the Robber Barons: A New Look at the Rise of Big Business in America." He says, the myth of the robber barons can be differentiated between political entrepreneurs and market entrepreneurs. The political entrepreneur succeeds by using the implicit violence of government to cripple his competitors and harm consumers. The market entrepreneur, on the other hand, makes his fortune by providing consumers with products they need at prices they can afford and maintains and expands his market share by remaining innovative and responsive to consumer demand. So the idea that, well, is business good or bad? Or is money something that is good or bad? Well, those are actually neutral things. There are principal differences between people who acquire wealth, money, and social power, as Rothbard likes to say, through the voluntary means, and people who use the coercive means. So as evil as John D. Rockefeller ended up being with his foundations and his cunningness and all this other terrible nonsense, in order for him to get any wealth in the free market, he had to create a good and service that people wanted to voluntarily purchase. Same with Henry Ford. If Jeff Bezos is the most evil man on the planet, let's just say I grant you that he is. Well, in order to become as rich as he is, he had to create products and services that benefited tens of millions of people and tens of millions of business owners who operate on Amazon, while the state is locking us down, stopping Amazon from having any competition. So seeing the difference, that there's actually a principal difference between political entrepreneurs and market entrepreneurs, stopped me pretty much from being a leftist altogether and believing that the problem is private versus public and the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. The actual principal difference is between violence and voluntarism. Kyle, next quote.
All right. The next one I have is from a New York Times article titled Quiet Support for Saudis Entangles U.S. and Yemen. And this is an article by the New York Times where they interviewed members of the Barack Obama administration. This wasn't like an expose. It was just explaining why the Barack Obama administration made the decision to support the Saudi war in Yemen. And to quote from the article, the White House needed to placate the Saudis as the administration completed a nuclear deal with Iran, Saudi's archenemy. That fact alone eclipsed concern among many of the president's advisors that the Saudi offensive would be long, bloody, and indecisive. And so, this one for me was crazy because up until the lead up of the war, I was listening to the Scott Horton show, and he had on experts like Nasser Arby and Iona Craig, and they were saying like, hey, this is gonna be really nasty, like we shouldn't get involved here, and not to mention the Houthis are the enemies of Al Qaeda, and it doesn't really seem like a smart conflict to get involved in, and it seems like the White House knew that, and it was simply to placate the Saudi princes over the Iran nuclear deal. And of course, now seeing how this has played out, of course, the Iran nuclear deal is almost all but dead at this point. I mean, it doesn't look like the Biden administration is going to bother to try to save it at this point. And yet the war in Yemen goes on. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. They traded a peace deal to start a war. And, of course, Obama's a Peace Prize winner. But even with all of that, the war is outliving the peace deal. It's an unbelievable and stupid concession that they made.
Pat, next quote for us.
Okay, this is my last quote, and it's a little bit long, so I hope you'll indulge. I know I've had long ones so far. I apologize for that. But this is the other, what I was referring to before. Before I read Anatomy of the State, this is what really turned me on to the possibility of anarchism. And this is Stefan Molyneux' The Story of Your Enslavement. And it was a video that I watched on YouTube. The original, of course, is not up, but I'll re-upload it. So he begins, this is the story of your enslavement, how it came to be, and how you can finally be free. Like all animals, human beings want to dominate and exploit the resources around them. At first, we mostly hunted and fished and ate off the land, but then something magical and terrible happened to our minds. We became alone among the animals, afraid of death and of future loss. And this was the start of a great tragedy and an even greater possibility. You see, when we became afraid of death, of injury, and imprisonment, we became controllable, and so valuable, in a way that no other resource could ever be. The greatest resource for any human being to control is not natural resources or tools or animals or land, but other human beings. You can frighten an animal because animals are afraid of pain in the moment, but you cannot frighten an animal with the loss of liberty or with torture or imprisonment in the future because animals have very little sense of tomorrow. You cannot threaten a cow with torture or sheep with death. You cannot swing a sword at a tree and scream at it to produce more fruit, or hold a burning torch to a field and demand more wheat. You cannot get more eggs by threatening a hen, but you can get a man to give you his eggs by threatening him. Human farming has been the most profitable and destructive occupation throughout history, and it is now reaching its destructive climax. Human society cannot be rationally understood until it is seen for what it is, a series of farms where human farmers own human livestock. Some people get confused because governments provide health care and water and education and roads, and thus imagine that there is some benevolence at work. Nothing could be further from reality. Farmers provide healthcare and irrigation and training to their livestock. Some people get confused because we are allowed certain liberties and thus imagine that our government protects our freedoms. But farmers plant their crops a certain distance apart to increase their yields and will allow certain animals larger stalls or fields if it means they will produce more meat and milk. In your country, your tax farm, your farmer grants you certain freedoms not because he cares about your liberties, but because he wants to increase his profits. Are you beginning to see the nature of the cage you were born into? So that got me. That hit me at the most fertile time. I was very fertile ground for these ideas, but stated that way, I get chills just reading it. So I thought it was very red pilling for me.
Definitely appreciating Molyneux's work as people are defooing us for not wearing the mask or taking the vaccine. My final quote is by Walter E. Williams, rest in peace. He says, "Prior to capitalism, the way people amassed great wealth was by looting, plundering, and enslaving their fellow man. Capitalism made it possible to become wealthy by serving your fellow man." I think this is probably Mises's great insight in Human Action, where he talks about how did we go from plundering and looting and enslaving and conquering, and now there's none of that. And it's not that we're impoverished and we've given up because of moral considerations. We're actually wealthier because we don't engage in that. And what Mises comes to the conclusion is that we engaged in the division of labor. People specialized in something and then traded with other people to increase their overall amount of wealth. As history goes on, we are much more diversified in what we consume, and we're more specialized in what we produce. Excellent quotes like that by Walter Williams, along with large-scale econ books by people like Ludwig von Mises to help us grasp and appreciate the principles behind things like free market, free trade, private property, allowing people to really express themselves in such a way that, for the same reason, we would want Adele to have access to more microphones and radio stations than I do. Well, we would want Scott Horton to have more access to books and pieces of paper than your average Joe does. In other words, the embracing of private property and inequality and voluntary hierarchy, far from being this terrible, evil thing we need to fight against, it's actually something we should embrace so long as it's done voluntarily through peaceful, voluntary exchange. What I want to end our time on here is I just want to go around and say 3 books that we thought really changed the way we see the world, and that we really would recommend that people read. I will go first because we actually didn't plan on this, so I'm going to give you a minute to write stuff down here. So my 3 books are Michael Huemer's book, The Problem of Political Authority. He goes through 1,000 years of political justifications for why it's okay for this group of people, called the government group, to rule another group of people called the citizen group. He opens the book up by saying, why is it that 535 people, called Congress, have the right to rule over 330 million Americans? And something like that was just so mind-blowing at the time that it was like I was hooked on page 1. The second book is Everyday Anarchy by Stefan Molyneux. It was such a non-aggressive introduction into the ideas anarchism, voluntarism, peaceful exchange, voluntary cooperation, that I finally understood where the anarchist mindset was coming from. Because I saw this guy who's sort of reasonable, Dave Smith, Tom Woods, Murray Rothbard, Lou Rockwell. I'm like, they're reasonable, but at the same time, they don't even believe in government. How could they be so sane yet so crazy? And then books like Everyday Anarchy really made that clear. Finally, The Use and Abuse of Logic by Madsen Prairie. He is the head of the Adam Smith Institute. And this is a book, a collection of 100 logical fallacies that really helped me think clear and made sure that I not only had a real justification for something, but helped me from stop being manipulated by irrational arguments. So those are my 3: Michael Huemer's The Problem of Political Authority, Everyday Anarchy by Stefan Molyneux, and The Use and Abuse of Logic by Madsen Prairie. Kyle Anzalone, 3 books that changed your intellectual life.
I gotta say, we already talked a little bit about Spooner, but of course, No Treason. Just the way that he writes and thinks about the Constitution was a real change for me. I think up until that point, I read this book, I was like a libertarian, but a libertarian who was like, oh, we follow the Constitution, that'll bring us to a libertarian society. And he completely obliterates that in that book. And then the other one I had was Tom Woods' 33 Questions, the myths one that he goes through. And it was one of the first real libertarian books I read, probably after Ron Paul's Libertarian Defined, which I was pretty, would maybe replace this one on this list. But, just going through all these little events in history that you learned about, and you learned about in a way that glorified the state or, pushed the narrative of the state. He goes through and debunks like every single one. And I'm pretty sure a key one from that book, and it's not from his politically incorrect guidebook, was that World War II brought the U.S. economy out of the Great Depression. Learning about that was huge for me at the time. And then I have up here a play by Aristophanes called Peace. And it's actually kind of funny. And he pokes fun at the warmongers of the time and kind of talks about how the kind of farmers are conscripted into the wars of the politicians, and humiliates the arms makers and stuff like that in the play. It's pretty interesting. And of course, this is written in ancient Greece. And so reading that and then realizing that, this is apparently what governments have always done, right? And of course, it's through satire. It's not like this boring Greek recounting of history. It's like Aristophanes poking pretty good fun and making poop jokes and stuff too.
All right, Pat, 3 books that changed your life.
First off, that's incredible, Kyle. Is he talking about like the shield makers? I gotta ask Kyle about this, but he's talking about that even then, the military industrial complex.
Yeah, he at one point he's talking about the like helmet makers or something like that. And there's like one of those lines in there like, go and beat your spears into hoes or something like that.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, that's awesome.
So Kyle, is this book Lysistrata? What is the title of the book?
It's Peace. It's a play. It's Peace. It's by Aristophanes. Yeah.
Okay, because there's one called Lysistrata where he also talks about the military-industrial complex, where he's like, there was such an industry for war that the only way to stop this war was not because people were aggressing against others. The women just said, we're going to stop sleeping with the soldiers until they stop using violence to achieve their ends, and that's how they do it. And it's like, oh my God, that kind of wisdom back then, because of course it's what of course it's crossed my mind today. It's like, well, if we'd stop clapping for all the soldiers and stop giving them all this positive attention. Of course, I got cussed out at Arizona State University for even mentioning such a thing in class once. But of course, that is one peaceful resolution to stop a war. So yeah, I'm sorry to plug Lysistrata, but I was actually not familiar with that one.
Yeah, in fact, another one of my favorite parts, just things that Aristophanes wrote is he at one point is making fun of Socrates, and he's saying that like the way you do the Socratic method is to like bend over and observe with your asshole. It's absolutely funny. It's like it's just great that like that kind of humor and these kind of problems, from ancient Greece and everything. Go ahead, Pat.
That's an awesome pick, Kyle. I love how we both of us just turned around and we're like trying to look through our bookshelves, being like, what should. So my first pick, it would be Enough Already by Scott Horton, the one he just released, but my copy is on the way. It's in the mail right now. So, but a good replacement is America's War for the Greater Middle East by Andrew Bacevich. And I picked this one because before I read this book, I had absolutely no context. I knew nothing about foreign policy. This starts with the Jimmy Carter years and works its way to the mid-2000 teens. And so I would suggest everyone start here. It's really easy to understand. Bacevich is in the military himself, and he just sets it all out in a good way. That this is a book that you could give your Republican dad who has always supported the wars. And it's one thing, he'll be receptive to it because it's by someone in the military. It's not written by some peace hippie, peacenik, what have you. So that's a good one, very informative. My second pick is Reclaiming the American Revolution, the Kentucky and Virginia Resolutions and Their Legacy. And this was written by William J. Watkins Jr. I've talked about it on my show a lot, but it actually goes through the deep dive history of the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, how they came to be, what the political climate was, how they were received, and how we can use it in the modern day to fight against the federal government. I know we did Lysander Spooner and no treason, but if the Constitution's there, you might as well use it just as well as any other method. So I'll defer to my interview with Michael Bolden on that one as well. And the last one that I have is this one was my introduction to economics, aside from economics in one lesson. But this is this is actually not the one that I wanted to grab. Anyways, well, this one is A History of Money and Banking in the United States by Murray Rothbard. So this is a good one too. But I'm trying to think of, it was a Murray Rothbard one, like Our Enemy.
I think you were thinking of The Mystery of Banking.
Yes. Thank you, Keith. Yeah, The Mystery of Banking. So that was the one that taught me about the Fed, how the Fed operates, what money is, and what currency debasement is, and all that kind of fun stuff. So those are my picks.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Kyle, remind everyone where they can find the collection of your work.
LibertarianInstitute.org. There, my name's on the masthead, Kyle Anzalone. We're also doing the 2021 fundraiser right now, matching funds going on. So if you want to donate and support the cause, really appreciate it. Great podcasts up there, including all three of ours.
Of course. Pat, where can the audience find you?
LibertyWeekly.net is the one-stop shop. You can also find my work at libertarianinstitute.org/Patrick. But yeah, we're so close to our goal, aren't we, Kyle? $50,000, and we have matching funds. Your donation is tax deductible, and you get awesome perks as well. So check that out.
You do get awesome perks. You know, it's funny reading about Rothbard's old works where he had said that, you know, War and Peace might be the solution to the whole libertarian question overall. And you see that in what changes someone from being more of a conservative, someone who's a utilitarian, to someone who's really principled. Mass murder is wrong. Theft is wrong. Kidnapping is wrong. Torture is wrong inherently, regardless of geographical area, something arbitrary like that. And so the secret to that is taking this principle that you believe in and applying it not only to America or Canada or North America, but also to all human beings on planet Earth. So when I see that, and then I see Scott Horton writing, you know, he's also with us at the Libertarian Institute, making the most important foreign policy contributions that I could think of. I mean, I know Robert Pape, of course, wrote a book, Cutting the Fuse, along with Dying to Win. Other than that, I mean, I think Scott Horton has made the greatest foreign policy contributions of our day, which Rothbard said was the most essential issue, who was the founder of anarcho-capitalism. So, I mean, please definitely check out the Libertarian Institute. All three of us are contributors. Subscribe to the podcast on any of your podcatchers. Thank you to Kyle Anzalone of the Libertarian Institute. His show is Conflicts of Interest. Patrick McFarlane, of course, Liberty Weekly, where I am the co-host. And thank you to everyone for watching Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone.